It's very possible that many of you have not been involved in installing and configuring Active Directory from scratch. And it's very possible that you have not configured a Windows Server 2012 from scratch either. Before I get to the many other aspects associated with Office 365, I want to just show you Active Directory install and configure and Windows Server 2012 installation and configuration, and I'll get to the Exchange pieces as well. It's very important that at the very least you have a good concept of what happens inside of the AD structure and what AD is for. You may use it all the time, but just because you use AD or you work with AD slightly doesn't necessarily mean you understand it. In order for you to properly understand Office 365 and the services around it, it's very important you understand all the components that surround it. Just because you're going to provision it inside of the cloud environment in Windows Azure does not mean you get to get away with not understanding how Active Directory actually works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Server 2012, and I'm going to install Active Directory inside of it. I'm going to install a Windows 8.1 Enterprise client, and I'll show you around Active Directory, users, group policies, scripts, shares, organizational units, so you understand and have a good handle on what it is. I'm also going to show you Active Directory manipulation from a PowerShell perspective, so you know how that works. Let's take a look first of all. I've got an Oracle VirtualBox, and I'm going to create a Windows 2012 domain on it, like so. And if you've never used Oracle VirtualBox, it's okay. It's just a hypervisor. It's a Type 2 hypervisor that sits on top of my Windows box, and it will allow me to create, let me put it inside make it internal network. It'll allow me to install Windows Server 2012, and it'll do it pretty quickly on this machine so that I can show you the configuration and installation of Server 2012 very easily. And it does it quite fast. The machine that I have right here has a solid-state disk on the C drive as one of the drives, and I've got a much bigger 2 terabyte drive on the D drive that is a SATA disk. So I'm installing this Windows Server 2012. You'll see the installation pop up. Here it is. I'm just going to do next and install. And once I select that I want to install, it's going to ask me what version of the Windows Server 2012 I want. I'm going to select Data Center version, Evaluation Server with a GUI. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to accept the license agreement, and I'm going to click Next. Do a custom installation, select Next, and it'll go through the install. It's going to happen quite fast. While this is in the process of installing, I want to talk to you about Active Directory and the components that surround it, and many of the things that I'm going to show you inside of AD. For example, here is a domain, as you can see right over here. Now, a domain is your boundary or your security boundary. Everything inside of your domain is something you control in your network. That is what you consider to be your network environment. The machines and users and applications and printers, all of those things, shares, are all your network boundary and your security boundary. So you have a domain controller, which is this. As you can see, you have a domain controller, which is this right here. And let's say the domain controller has to have a name. And you got to give it a proper DNS name. So I gave it the name class.edu, for example, for our purposes. Okay. So let's say that class.edu is going to be our domain, and that's a domain that I'm going to construct. Okay. Along with the domain controller, what gets installed is DNS. DNS is a very big piece of the Active Directory equation. You cannot install and manage and manipulate anything in Active Directory without having a DNS server installed. As a matter of fact, when you install Active Directory, it asks you if you want to install DNS server along with it. And I will install DNS server inside of my AD environment. Look, this is almost done. Here it is restarting. I told you it was going to be pretty quick. Right? That's the benefit of a solid-state disk. It's going to come back up and it's going to ask me for a password, and it's going to restart after it asks me for a password. So the name of my domain that I'm going to construct is going to be class edu. It's going to install DNS. It's going to place that class edu in the forward lookup zone. And I'm able to create what are known as organizational units inside of Active Directory. Organizational units are essentially your organizational structure as much as possible. You want to make Active Directory structure very close to the way your organizational structure is. It's not always possible, but as much as possible, you want your organization structure to match as closely as possible with AD. So the top level structure can be your organization, and then your departments, each of the departments perhaps as OUs, or each of the branches as OUs, or each of the locations as OUs, and then underneath the organizational units you supply users and computers and such so that you can deploy policies and permissions and such to the organizational units. Okay? So here it's asking me for an admin password, and I'm going to supply it with one. So here it is finalizing the settings. The great easy thing about Oracle VirtualBox is it's very, very small footprint in the big scheme of things. I'm able to work with Oracle VirtualBox very easily, and it is a free product. Windows Server 2012 Trial Edition is a free product you can download. I think it's a 90-day or 180-day trial that you can download for free. So for the purposes of learning how things work, it is a great tool. So here I am logging on to my server. And once I log on to the server, I need to do a few things. I'm going to change the IP address on this box so that it is on my internal side. I've configured an internal-only network in Oracle VirtualBox, and I'm going to specify an IP address. Say, and that's going to be the IP address for this box. And this, I'm going to install DNS on it. So the preferred DNS server is going to be on the local machine. So I just specified it to be the loopback address. So that's that. And then I'm going to go over to firewalls, right over Windows Firewall. I'm going to allow app or feature, and I'm going to enable file and printer sharing so that I can ping this machine. Click OK. Close out of this. I'm going to go over to local server, select the name of the computer, and change the name of the computer to be DC for domain control. I'm going to click OK. And I'm not going to restart it just yet. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click Close, restart later. And I'm going to go to IE Enhanced Security Configuration. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to click OK. I am going to then go over to my devices up here. Specify install guest additions. Now what guest additions does is it will install the services needed for the virtual environment, for the Oracle VirtualBox environment to interact properly with this Windows Server 2012 virtual machine. In the Microsoft universe, this is known as integration services. For Oracle VirtualBox, it is known as guest additions. For VMware, it is known as VMware Tools. It really is all the same thing. It is a client that is installed so that it can properly understand and work with the virtual environment. So here I am. I'm going to log in over here. Now once this restarts, I'm going to install Active Directory domain services on here. It's restarting here. And I'm going to change the view to be full screen. Look, now you can't even tell if it's a Windows Server or a Windows Workstation. I'm going to select Add Roles and Features, and I'm going to click Next, Next, Next. Active Directory Domain Services, Add Features. Now this does not install Active Directory. It installs the tools needed to get Active Directory Domain Services installed on this box. Active Directory Domain Controller is essentially a database. You cannot have an Active Directory Domain Controller installed without having Active Directory Domain Services installed, ADDS. As of Windows Server 2008, they separated the services, Active Directory Domain Services and the domain controller pieces, so that you can install Active Directory Domain Controller after the services are installed. If you have worked with domain controller installation in 2008 or earlier, you recall running something called DC Promo. In Windows Server 2012 and later, DC Promo, the tool, doesn't exist anymore. Well, you can still download it actually, but it doesn't exist anymore. You do it through, you install Active Directory through the wizard. Once you install Active Directory Domain Services, it will give you this option right over here to promote the server to a domain controller. And I'm going to create a new forest, and I'm going to call it class.edu. And I'm going to click Next. And it's looking to see if there is an other domain controller called class.edu, and it's asking me a domain services restore mode password. I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to click Next. And it's going to specify a NetBIOS name here for pre-Windows 2000 servers. I don't have any. But it's going to do it anyway as part of its installation process. And I labels it class, and I'm going to click Next. And here it is installing the database log files and sysvol. I'm going to put it in the default folders. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to select Install once this is done. And it's going to begin to install Active Directory on this computer. And once Active Directory is getting installed on this machine, I'm going to begin to install. Here's Active Directory being installed. I'm going to begin the installation. So it's installing Active Directory. I'm going to begin the installation of Windows 8. So I'm going to do client Windows 8 and next, 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 next. And I'm going to go to settings, specify storage, and specify that I want Windows 8.1. So it looks like I've got a version of Windows 8 that's not supported. That's okay. I'm going to install another version of Windows Server 2012, and I'm going to make it the client. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to go to Settings, and I'm going to change this to be Server 2012 right over here. And I'm just label it Client, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to click OK. Let's see how far the domain controller is. Look at this. It's already restarting. Domain controller ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, and Active Directory Domain Controller is installed already. It's restarting this machine. And once it restarts, it's going to be, AD is going to be installed on it. And I'm going to make the other server a member of this domain and make that my client machine. And I'm also going to show you how to navigate and work around PowerShell. It's very possible that these are components that you haven't really worked with. It's very critical that you understand the basis of the installation, all of the installation components, and you understand from a technical perspective what's involved. There are a few things I'm going to go over which are going to be very beneficial for you to know so that you understand the complete picture and the back end very well. So here it is, starting up Windows Server 2012 with Active Directory installed. And here's another look. So what we just did is we installed Active Directory just now, and we labeled our domain controller class.edu. Right? And we are going to create startup scripts. We're going to assign desktop settings so you see what that's like. We are going to construct auditing and disk quotas because I want you to see what that does. We're going to manipulate the start menu so you see what that does. We're going to create org units. We're going to create group policies so you know what that's like. We will build users. Okay. We will delegate tasks. I want you to see what all this is like. I'm going to create a printer and I'm going to share it so you see what shares are like. I'm going to share drives, I'm going to share printers, I'm going to create users, I'm going to create scripts, I'm going to create group policies. So you're going to see everything. So you're able to better understand everything. Right? These are some of the things that Perhaps someone else has built for you in your organization. You are not the Active Directory person. You are not the person that built the AD structure. So it's very important for you to know at the very least. And yes, I'm going through this a little bit fast. I'm not able to discuss every single detail because there's simply too many. But I want to go through the components so you know a little bit background on what's involved. So I'm going to log on to the domain controller as the administrator. And the domain controller is coming up. Here it is. And my domain is up. And I'm going to, in this case, so the domain controller is up. All right. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install my second machine. I'm going to start the installation of my second box. And I am installing Windows Server 2012, except for the fact that it is going to install the server edition, which is just fine. And I need to do one other thing in here. I'm going to need to make the network internal only so that I can communicate with my other Windows Server 2012 machine, basically my domain controller, and not hinder the network in general. So here I am. I'm going to click Next, click Install. I'm using the keyboard. That's why you're not seeing my mouse move. It's just faster for me. So here it is, starting it. It's going to ask me what version I want, and I'm going to select Next for the Data Center Edition, accept the license agreement, install custom, click Next, and off it goes with the installation. Now, while this is going on, here's my domain controller. I want to show you a couple of things. In Tools, I've got Active Directory users and computers. Let me make this bigger. It's going to open up AD users and computers. Here it is. Here it is. Okay. And I've got users here. I've got computers here. Now, I don't have any computers, but I do have a domain controller, which is this machine called DC. Right? And I have administrator user, right? As you can see, I have a guest user that has been disabled, which I don't want. These are the default users and groups that are installed as part of the Active Directory installation. When you have an AD installation from scratch, this is what you get. As you can see, there are no OUs that are created. So I can right-click on the class EDU and select New, specify organizational unit right over here, and call the org unit sales. Okay. And I can also create an organizational unit using command line. Maybe you haven't done this. I love doing it this way. I can do DS. Let me make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see it better. I'm going to go to Properties, go to Font, change the font over here. Enable bold fonts, change the colors here. And click OK. There you go. Maybe you can see that better, right? And I'm going to call this, I'm going to do DS add, organizational unit, and I'm going to do OU. And I'm going to label the OU, IT support. DC class, DC EDU, okay? And that creates the organizational unit called IT support inside of the domain component class, which is a prefix, and domain component EDU, which is a suffix. When I refresh this, you'll see the IT support organizational unit right here, and there's a sales org unit right there. I can also open up PowerShell. For those of you that have not worked with PowerShell, I would strongly suggest that you do so. PowerShell is a very key component of being able to effectively administer the Active Directory environment and the Windows environment in general. PowerShell, I'm going to set execution policy in PowerShell to remote signed, so that I can import module Active Directory. Okay. Active Directory module has been imported. Now what that did is, if I run PS drive, it gave me AD as a drive letter right here. Okay. This is the name of the drives that it has, and Active Directory is the provider. So what does that do for me? Well, here's what it does for me. When I do CD AD:, I have access to my domain. Look at that. So if I do cd class, if I do cd dc class dc edu, maybe I need to spell that right, du, I am able to gain access to my class edu. Here's computers, here's the IT support OU that I created. Here is the sales OU that I constructed. Right. I can also, in here, for example, I can say new AD organizational unit. And I can say, for example, right from here, I can create an org unit and call the org unit HR. Right. And it's saying, hey, I've got an invalid path in this case. So I'm going to do CDC, CDAD, and I'm going to do CD, DC class, DC EDU. Okay, there it is. And I'm going to do new AD organizational unit, and I'm going to call this thing HR. Okay, now it's constructed. It just created an organizational unit called HR right inside of here. When I click on class EDU and do a refresh, there's the HR organizational unit. Okay. So I'm able to work with Active Directory. So if I do CD OU equals HR, there is the HR organizational unit. And if I do new AD user, and I can specify username John C, and now I have a user called John C. When I do a refresh in here, there's a user John C. Isn't that slick? Let me go over to the command prompt, and let me add a user using a command prompt. Let me show you. I'm going to add a user in the sales OU. So I'm going to do ds add, cn equals Tom C, OU equals sales, DC equals class, DC equals edu, password equals password, and disabled equals no. ds add user. And it's done. Now what I did here, if you take a look, there's a line that allows me to add the user at the command line using the ds add tool. And when I do a refresh over here, when I do a sales, there's a Tom C user that I just added. I can also take this line right over here, right? This whole line right over here, and I can mark it, and I can say, I can create a folder called utils, and I can create make user CMD, and paste that line, change Tom C to %1. Save this and exit. And right over here, I just created a batch file called makeuser.cmd. There it is right there. Right? And this batch file contains, when I do a type make user CMD, it contains the command ds-add, and it will add the user that I pass in as a parameter. %1 is a parameter that I pass into this batch file. And it's going to put the user in the sales OU. Watch. So if I do make user, Eric B, and I do a refresh in sales, there's Eric B. That's neat, isn't it? I can create another user in here, call it Ava M. When I go over here and do a refresh, there's Ava M. Right? So very easy to construct and build the user structure. In any case, the next thing I have to do, let's see how far along the client is. It's done. I'm going to log on over here to the client, supply it the password, and I have to install, I have to do a few things on this client. Let me log in over here. I have to make this a member of my domain. I have to assign it an IP address. Now, instead of assigning this thing an IP address, I'm going to create a DHCP server on my domain controller. Let me show you how that's done. It's very simple. This is my domain controller. I'm going to do add roles and features and click next and click next and click next. I want to show you something else as well. On this client right now, if I go to the command prompt, notice the address right over here. This is an APIPA address, 169.254. That means that there is no DHCP server, and it also means that there is no static address assigned to this box. So I'm going to create a DHCP server, and I'm going to have an address assigned to this by my DHCP server, which I'm going to build on the domain controller. Let's take a look. So I'm going to install a DHCP server, add roles and features, and click Next, click Next, click Next. Restart if needed, say yes, click Install. And it's going to install a DHCP server. It's not going to take very long at all. And once a DHCP server is installed, I'm going to complete the configuration by specifying a starting address and ending address. I'm going to specify my DNS server, my gateway, and it's going to create a DHCP server, and I'll be able to get an IP address on my client. In this case, my client happens to be another Windows Server 2012 box, which will work just fine. So this is done. Click over here, and I'm going to complete the DHCP configuration. And I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to click, going to click Commit, Close. Okay. That's completing the configuration. Okay. So I've got the DHCP server. I'm going to click on Tools and select DHCP Manager. Open up DHCP Manager, and I'm going to begin creating a DHCP scope, new scope. And the name of my scope is class 192.168.1.100, 192.168.1.200. 24, no exclusions. 192.168.1.1 is my gateway. Class edu, my server name, okay, is DC. I can resolve that. Yep. And it's going to make sure that the DNS server is there on this server. And yes, I've got DNS server running inside of this domain controller. It got installed as a result of installing AD. I don't want that in there twice. I'm going to click Next, activate the scope, click Finish. Refresh the scope, take a look at the scope options, and I've got the router, 192.168.1.1, DNS server, 192.168.1.1, and domain name is class.edu. Okay, so that's all done. Then I'm going to go over and I'm going to create a reverse lookup zone on my DNS server. I'm going to open up DC, and I'm going to right-click on reverse lookup zone and create a new zone. And I'm going to create 192.168.1.1, 1 dot. Click Next, create a reverse lookup zone. There it is. Okay. And now I want to make sure, if I look at the DHCP server, and this is DNS, I'm going to go in the DHCP manager, and in class IPv4 scope. Okay, in scope, if I do address leases, there's the IP address assigned already to this computer name. Okay, what is that? Well, that is my client right over here. Now, if I go over here and I do a command and I do ipconfig, notice I've got an IP address assigned. Look, I've got a domain assigned, an IP address assigned, so my DHCP server works. But I got to fix this server. I'm going to go over to local server. I'm going to click on computer name, and I'm going to change the computer name to say client. Right? And I need to fix a few other things on here. It's going to say welcome to the work group. I click close, restart later. I'm going to go over to IE enhanced security configuration. I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to go over to devices, and I'm going to install guest editions. I'm going to open up my folder over here, go to computer, double click on the CD, install guest editions really quick so that it can communicate with this VM easily. Click install. And I'm going to reboot manually later. And I'm going to add myself to the domain change. No, I got to restart it first. I'm going to go over to tasks. I'm going to go over to shut down local server. I'm going to restart it. Maintenance, click OK. and it's going to restart this machine. Now, once this is restarted, I'm going to join this machine to my domain. Okay. Once I join this machine to my domain, what's going to happen is, here it is, restarted already. I'm going to, it's going to join this machine to the domain, and on the DC, inside of Active Directory, I'm going to see a computer right over here called client. Once I'm done, let me go back to it, click on local server, click on workgroup, click on change, click on domain, specify that I want to join the class domain, specify the username, specify a password so I can join the class domain. And I also need to fix the firewall to allow for file and printer sharing, and the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can ping the machine. By default, the firewall blocks ping requests, and I want to enable that. So this is joining the domain. It'll come back and it will say, welcome to the class domain. Okay. And this machine over here, both of the machines I've got on an internal only network. Okay. So they're able to communicate with each other only. They're not able to see the outside world. Here's welcome to the class domain. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click close, and I'm going to select restart. And here it is restarting. And once it restarts, I'm going to log on to the class domain. Let's go over here and do a refresh on computers. And here's my client computer right over there. All right. So that's that. And let me log on to the domain controller, not on the client. I want to log on to the domain. So I'm going to log on as administrator at class.edu, supply it the password, and I will log on to the domain controller as a domain admin. Here we go. Here's logging on to the domain controller. Right. So now I'm logged on to the domain, right, as a client. Now let me go back to the domain controller, and I'm going to go over to the sales OU, and here's the HR OU. Let me enable this user over here. I'm going to go over to reset password. I'm going to supply it the password, and I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to enable this user. Go over to Properties, Account, and right now the user is disabled. I'm going to uncheck that, click OK. Now the user is enabled. And I'm going to create another user in the HR OU. I'm going to do CD utils, and I'm going to do copy make user to make user to say HR user CMD, notepad, HR user CMD, change this, change the org unit of this to be HR instead of sales, just like that. Save this and exit, and I can do HR user, Tim C, HR user, Paul S. Done. I can, of course, do this manually as well. I can right-click over here, select New User, and I can type in the user information. Sam Jackson, S. Jackson, or Sam J. Specify the password, and say that the user is finished. There you go. Okay. I'm just not a big fan of doing it this way. It takes too long. As you saw, I'm able to build users utilizing the command line much faster, and I think you will too. So I've got HR OU and I've got sales OU. Now I'm going to create some users in the IT support OU. Utils, copy HR, IT user CMD, notepad IT user CMD, change this to IT support, Save that and exit. And then I'm going to do IT user, and I'm going to call it Larry E. I'm going to call it IT user Jim R. And I'm going to say IT user Terry K. All done. Now when I do a refresh, I've got 3 users in IT support, I've got users in HR, I've got users in sales. Okay. Really kind of slick, right? Nice and easy. Okay. Now what I can do is, let me make sure that I can log on as one of these users. Let me try logging in as Eric B. Okay. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to go over to the client, and I'm going to say, I'm going to go over to local server, tasks, and I'm going to do a shutdown. I'm going to select that. I want to sign out. And I'm going to log back in as Eric B. Supply it the password. And it's going to log on to the domain as Eric B. There we go. All right. And let me see if I can have resources assigned to Eric B. I'm going to open up a folder. I'm going to open up computer, go to the C drive, right click, select new, folder, and I'm going to call the folder documents, and I'm going to call the folder documents for Eric B. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say share with specific people, Eric B, add, and I'm going to make Eric B the read-write person. Okay, read-write for that group. I'm going to click share and click done. Now I've got Eric B, this folder shared out with Eric B. Let's see if this works. If I go over to the client, open up the folder, right click on computer, select map network drive, specify the name of the domain, name of the folder, click finish. It says, it doesn't really know what that is. Let's see, browse, network, no, doesn't like it. And let me see, Eric B, let me go over to the command prompt. If I do a net share, I see a folder called Eric B, and I see the share as Eric B, right? And what I'm going to do is if I right click and I go to properties and I select sharing and I do advanced sharing, it's shared as Eric B. If I go to permissions, I'm going to select add Eric B, and I'm going to say that Eric B is going to be the person that's going to have full control over this. I'm going to remove everyone, and I'm going to add authenticated users. And authenticated users will have read-only access, administrator will have full control, and Eric B will have full control. I'm going to click OK, click Close, go back over to the client and select Client and specify, right-click on Computer, Map Network Drive, DC, Eric B, and it can't access it. Let's take a look. Ping DC. Yeah, I can ping the DC, no problem. One other thing I forgot to do over here, I'm going to right-click over here, go to Network and Sharing, go over to the Windows Firewall, select Allow App or Feature to the Firewall, change settings, specify the administrator user ID and password. I'm going to allow file and printer sharing access to this. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right-click over here, go to Open Network and Sharing, go over to the Windows Firewall, allow app or feature, and in file and printer sharing, right over here, there it is, domain is allowed. And I'm going to allow file and printer sharing over SMB Direct as well. Click OK. Close out of this, minimize this, go over here inside of my client, do a net use. Net use is a command that I can apply. DC Eric B, right? Enter. Now it says network name cannot be found. If I do a net view DC, this shows me, as you can see, Eric B right over here, okay? That I can see the Eric B share, right? If I do a net use let me do a right-click, Map Network Drive, connect using credentials, and I'm going to select DC, Eric B. Okay. And if I specify the name of my user, Eric B, specify the password for Eric B, okay, it says it can't use it. Now, if I log on as administrator to that share, it just can't see the share, right, as you can see. So if I go over to the server on the DC, I right-click, I'm going to go to Properties, Sharing, and I'm going to turn off. I'm going to remove this. Okay. I'm going to click Share, click Done, Advanced Sharing. And Eric B is the name of the share, as you can see. Right? I'm going to turn sharing off. Apply. Click OK. Click OK. And click Close. Now this folder is not shared at all. Okay? As you can see, this folder is not shared at all. I'm going to right-click over here, go to Properties, go over to Sharing, select Advanced Sharing, share this folder as Eric B Docs. Go to Permissions and remove permissions over here. Add permissions to authenticated users. Add permissions to Eric B, and give Eric B full control. And add permissions to administrator and give the administrator account full control. And click OK, click OK, click. Here's DC, Eric B Docs. You see it? Right there's the network path that is shared out. Click Close. Right. Now when I minimize this, go over to the client. And I do net use asterisk DC Eric B Docs. And notice it mapped it. Let me show you using the folder. I'm going to go over to the computer, Map Network Drive, / DC Eric B Docs. And come on, it shared it. Right click, Map Network Drive, / let me do this. Browse. Now this is the entire network. Now it says over here, look what it says. It says that my network, the discovery on the network is turned off. Okay? So if I go over to my server manager, okay, and if I go over to Open Network and Sharing Center, and I'm going to go over to Advanced Sharing, I'm going to turn on network discovery. See right over here, that was turned off. I'm going to save the changes, specify the password, Okay, so network sharing and discovery is turned on now. If I go over to the folder and I select Map Network Drive, do a browse. Now it's browsing the network. Here it is. It's looking at the network to see what it can see. And it should notice, in this case, it's noticing my server. Right? So it's very important that you turn on certain components. So I've got Active Directory installed, I've got Server 2012 installed, I've got Discovery turned on, I've got DHCP installed, DNS is installed as part of it. At least you're able to see some of what Active Directory is. I'm going through it in a review mode, and I am making quite a few assumptions about the back end. I'm really glad you're here. Hopefully you're learning something new.
Start with new learning now.